I've got with me here perhaps the best local sports talk show host in America. He's been a regular radio sportscaster in Southern California for more than 20 years on various radio stations, doing play-by-play of several teams and hosting a sports talk phone-in show like no one else. He's the great Lee Hacksaw Hamilton. And Lee, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thank you. Glad to have the opportunity to sit and talk to all of your listeners.
All right, great. I've admired your sports insights and your sports talk show for a long time. We've got a lot of topics on the table, as you would say, to cover. And I'd like to start with your background, Lee. Where'd you grow up and how'd you get into sportscasting, et cetera?
I've been doing this my whole life. Native of Long Island, grew up in New York, went to university in Ohio, majored in radio, television, and communications. Came out of a sports and journalism background. My father was a pitcher in the minor leagues in baseball. My uncle was a sports writer, so I kind of grew up in this environment. I have been doing one form or fashion of talk radio since I was 18 years of age, and spent virtually my entire career doing talk radio. Have dabbled out doing play-by-play as well as doing some TV work, but I am radio lock, stock, and barrel.
Sounds great, and you sure do sound great all the time. Prior to arriving in Southern California, Lee, where'd you work?
Well, I started in Appalachia, small market Appalachia. I kind of did it old school. I went from small market to medium market, went from southern Ohio to upstate New York, and then from Utica, New York to Cleveland, and kind of started on a trail of major market into Cleveland, then into Phoenix, and then out here to San Diego, Los Angeles. I spent 7 years in Cleveland, 7 years in Phoenix, and I'm in my 22nd year in Southern California. Started at San Diego in what was the old Extra Sports 690, the historic all-sports station, and then obviously we transitioned through mergers and everything, and we're now based out of Los Angeles at AM 570 KLAC doing sports talk.
Wow, how about that? Well, where was it where you developed the sports talk style and features that you have? You know, the stories like the Newsmaker line that you do, which is always wonderful, and got a hot story here off the line in Cleveland or something like that, the best 15 minutes of radio and so on. Where'd you get the ideas for those?
People want information, and I've always done drive time, Bob, and I think that's the thing, is I have a, quote, captured audience. I mean, you know, you're based out of Southern California, so you really know about gridlock. Well, I developed this philosophy in Cleveland, and it followed with me to Phoenix, and then obviously into San Diego and Los Angeles, is that people have been at work all day. And we all know you're doing 8 miles an hour in drive time in the afternoon, and I have the opportunity to update you on everything that's happened in the world of sports while you've been at work. And that's where I developed a theory. I think the other thing that I did was that because we're in the Sun Belt, not everybody is from here. There's a lot of people that have emotional ties back there, wherever they came from.
Exactly.
So they want to know about their favorite team, the Red Sox or the Green Bay Packers, or what's going on in Chicago or in the Big Ten Conference. So I try to shape and form my talk show to deal not only with the local teams in town, but also dealing with what's going on out of town, so that by the time we get done with my, as I say, my best 15 minutes in radio, which is kind of a capsule of all the big stories in the world of sports, you'll know everything there is.
Absolutely, and you do such a terrific job. I was going to say one thing about listening to you and your show, Lee, is that you do talk sports. You take calls, no fooling around. Your preparation and knowledge is certainly tremendous. One thing, and I was talking to you about this before we went on here, is one thing that you do, you break stories. And I'm a diehard Nebraska football fan. I grew up in Omaha. I've been out here in Southern California since 1985. And on 2 occasions, I found out about a big Nebraska story on your show. One was in April 1996. That was Brooke Behringer, the Nebraska quarterback on the 94 and 95 national title teams, being killed in a plane crash. I was shocked. And December 1997, Tom Osborne retiring from coaching. And you cover things very well, Lee, and you do not leave anything out.
Well, I think the whole theory of what I do is I will give you the information that I get access to, and we've got all the resources here at KLAC. I will give you all the information I have, and then I will give you opinions based on that information, and then I'll invite you as a talk show listener stuck in gridlock to respond to my opinion and respond to the information and get your opinion. And it's a fast-moving show. We take on the average of 10 to 12 calls per hour. We do 2 newsmaker guests per hour. I mean, we do pack a lot of energy into what we do. Yeah.
Thorough. Talk about your definition, Lee, of the Southern California sports fan. You've talked about this earlier. So many people here, including you and me, have moved from another part of the country or the world, for that matter. How do you compare fans in California to other cities around the United States?
Well, that's a really good question, because it's different. It's radically different. If you were from Boston, if you were from Chicago, if you were likely from Pittsburgh, odds are that your father was from there, and his father probably was from there, and you grew up a Red Sox fan, or you grew up a Bears or a Cubs fan. Now, if you're in the Sun Belt, it's very different. You probably have as much a mixed bag of people living in Miami as you do in Southern California. So you know, those sports fans in those markets grew up in those markets, and their fathers grew up in those markets, and their grandfathers grew up in their markets. So there's a different type of lineage of sports fan there than there is out here. Here, these people are more diverse. They have more interest. Yes, they're excited about the Dodgers being in first place, but you know what? At the end of the day, I'm a Philadelphia Philly transplant. I want to know about my Eagles or my Phillies. So my whole philosophy is not only to update you on what's happening with these teams here in our town, but obviously to you know, solve your interest and update you on what's going on with your favorite team back home.
And that sure does make a lot of sense. You think about everybody, and I think that's great. Now, in your 20 years or so, Lee, how have fans changed?
A lot more knowledgeable. You know, the internet has changed our whole society. You know, now, Bob, you think about these days, what was life like before cell phones? What was life like before the internet showed up a decade ago?
Tell me about it.
It's really different. I remember when I worked in Cleveland, and that was before the internet and all that. I used to scour the newspapers just to see what's going on in other markets. It took a lot of time, etc. But I would use that background information to present the best 15 minutes in radio. Now we use the internet. We have access to a lot of different network feeds. It's like a fraternity. I know everybody in every market that does what I do in other markets. And if I need some information about the Detroit Tigers, I'll deal with my pipeline people that cover the Tigers. And there's a constant, at least those of us that do talk radio, there's a constant swapping of information. But the fans, back to your original question, it's a very valid question. The fans are very different. They're much more knowledgeable because they have access to the internet and they have interest about their team back home, and they're much more opinionated too. So it's just a very different environment right now. I think it's a fun environment.
Now, you've worked both cities. Compare the LA sports fan to the San Diego sports fan.
Wow. I think the LA sports fan has a lot more emotional ties to specific teams there. It's a much bigger city. San Diego fans, I think, are really passionate about their local teams. I don't think they care about what's going on the 213, the 310, the 714, or 949. I don't think San Diego cares very much about what's going on in Orange County or Los Angeles. I do think Los Angeles pays attention to what's going on with the teams down here. But I think these people, I don't know if the correct word is parochial. They only worry about these things in their own little community.
Sure, I can understand that. I'd like now to cover some sports issues with you, Lee. What, in your mind, is the timetable of an NFL team coming back to Los Angeles?
I would have thought it would have been done by now. Bob, I'm absolutely floored. But, you know, the longer this has gone on, the cost has gone up. I just don't know how it's doable anymore because the city of L.A. can't provide public services. How are they going to provide money for a franchise? It's much like San Diego. I'm stunned that the number 2 market does not have a new stadium. You know, we were beset by bad ownership with Al Davis and bad ownership with Giorgio Frontiere. We're beset, obviously, by a very, very negative political climate here in Los Angeles. I just don't think financially it can get done. San Diego's got the same problem, and that's a small market city, and they can't get a stadium built there. The problem is that San Diego missed the boat. They could have done this back in the late 90s. They had the money in place. They didn't get it done, and now they're really between a rock and a hard place. And I don't see a new stadium being built in L.A. in the foreseeable near future.
One theory that I had on that was do it the St. Louis way, and that is build a stadium without a team there yet and watch a team move there, such as what the Rams did. They moved to St. Louis. The only problem with that is, I guess, in Los Angeles, who funds it and where do you put the stadium?
That's the biggest issue. That is the hugest issue. Back when they built what was the TWA Dome when it first opened, Bob, it was about a $470 million facility. It's a beautiful facility indoors. Right now, the price tag in L.A., when you add in real estate, is over $1 billion.
Wow.
Who's going to write that check? And it's the same thing down in Orange County. The Platinum Triangle, Bob, has a value of about $1.5 billion. Well, who's going to buy that land and then construct the stadium on it because it's such valuable property for office buildings, etc. And the same scenario is happening in San Diego. Just it's not cost effective.
So are the Chargers set in San Diego, do you think?
I think they're stuck in San Diego.
Oh, okay.
I don't realistically believe that Orange County is a player in this anymore. Then I don't believe, unless the league is going to pay for it, and I don't see that happening, I don't know that LA is viable for them, and they've got their own set of problems down in San Diego. They just can't come up with the county to give them the land. The problem is they're willing to pay for it, but they want the land free. Well, the land free is a significant amount of money. So they've been trying since 1997 on the stadium issue. It's now 2007.
Wow, that's amazing. By the way, we're taping in 2007 on June 23rd here on a Saturday right after Lee's great show. Now, Lee, what do you feel was Marty Schottenheimer's downfall in the playoffs? Was it him or the team just simply not performing?
Well, he's got a historical track record of failure, dating back to Cleveland, dating back to Kansas City, and obviously now through San Diego. I don't think he should have been fired. It was deeper than that. It was just not what his record was, 5-12 in postseason play or 5-13 in postseason play. It was a personality clash with the general manager, who's a power-hungry guy, and I think it's going to hurt the Chargers greatly. Marty's a great coach. He's a player's coach. His players, look at his track record, 200 career wins. They responded very positively towards the gentleman. So I don't think he should have been fired. He was fired. Changes occur all the time in the NFL, but I think San Diego as a team is going to take a step back because they lost their head coach. They lost some really good coordinators along the way.
You just answered my next question. I was going to ask you, how do you feel North Turner will do as Chargers coach, and are the Chargers a Super Bowl team? Apparently you're saying not.
I think they're close to being a Super Bowl team, but there's a fine line. There's a whole bunch of things, Bob, that kind of fall into that place. Norv is a good guy. He's a very bright offensive coordinator. He has failed as a head coach. He's never been able to put his arms around everything, and I don't see anything different in San Diego than the other places that he's been head coach. That being said, it is a really good team, but keep in mind, they played the easiest schedule in the league last year. They had virtually no injuries. This year they play one of the tougher schedules in the league, and you don't go 2 straight years without having significant injuries. So maybe they let that opportunity get by them. Did Marty have some shortcomings as a head coach in postseason play in terms of getting ultra-conservative? Yeah, but it still has to be done on the players. I mean, they dropped 6 balls last year in that playoff game, and guys who did not make mistakes during the season suddenly got a case of stage fright.
Dropsies.
Yeah. So how is that Schottenheimer's fault when the players don't perform under the gun and under pressure when they performed under pressure during all the course of the season?
That's amazing. You know, we're talking to Lee Hacksaw Hamilton here, the great sports talk show host who's been doing sports talk in Southern California for over 20 years now. Lee, you also did play-by-play on Charger games for many, many years. The top moment for you, of course, had to be the win over Pittsburgh to advance to the Super Bowl in the 1994 season. Give us your memories of that.
Well, you know, it's interesting. People ask me, because I was the voice of the Chargers for 11 years when the games were on our all sports station on Extra 690, and I'm still viewed as being the voice of the Chargers now. The Super Bowl game was a disaster, but I appreciate greatness in the 49ers under Steve Young in the Super Bowl. That was a great offensive team. The win in Pittsburgh was just absolutely phenomenal. Because I don't think we expected to win that game there. Pittsburgh was Pittsburgh, Steel Curtain defense, Blitzburg, Three River Stadium, et cetera, et cetera. To me, my memory of that whole thing is the journey, the whole journey of the whole season of winning games where you never thought they had a chance.
Yeah.
Winning against the Raiders up at that point was in L.A. Just absolutely amazing. Winning some of the road games that they won. Couldn't believe that was happening. Getting a little bit of lady luck, beating Dan Marino and the Miami Dolphins. Couldn't believe that was happening. So it was to me, the journey to get to that championship game was the thing that I really remember and valued the most.
What do you think is the nicest stadium in the NFL today?
Well, I haven't traveled some of the new ones recently. I am told that Heinz Field in Pittsburgh is spectacular. The new stadium in Baltimore is spectacular. So is the one in downtown Cleveland. Quest Field up in Seattle, where I did the Seahawks, is a really special place, the way it's constructed and on the front there. But they're all state-of-the-art cookie-cutter stadiums now. They're all spectacular. They all cost $1 billion, too.
Gosh. Now, you, as we mentioned, did Charger games for a lot of years. Then all of a sudden, you didn't return as the play-by-play man for the Chargers. What happened there?
Well, they left our station. I had nothing to do with it. I had a great run with them, had a great working relationship. They left our station to go somewhere else, and it hasn't worked out. They've been at 3 different radio stations since they left Extra Sports, and they've gone through 3 different announcers right now. And it's too bad. People make bad business decisions. I think it kind of comes back to haunt them. But, I got the opportunity because of my reputation to go to Seattle. I did the Seahawks for a couple of years, had just an absolute blast as they were kind of coming out of the dark ages. They had been a bad franchise for a long time, and they finally got to the playoffs under Mike Holmgren. But the thing is, the rules of broadcasting change. As teams leave stations, announcers kind of get caught in the middle of the whole thing, and sometimes you can go do the games other places, sometimes you're not allowed to go do the games other places, so it's too bad. I loved it. I think I'm very, very good at what I do in terms of play-by-play, but unfortunately I'm just not doing it at this point in time.
Well, we certainly hope you get back on soon. Now, you did USC football games. Describe the difference between broadcasting pro football and college football.
Well, it's a different environment. I love them both. Pac-10 is just a great conference, Bob, to be in. It's ahead of the curve in terms of throwing the football. There are great athletes everywhere in the Pac-10. It's a very colorful conference to travel and to be around, and I enjoyed that a great deal. USC, I did the Trojans for 3 years when they were on Extra, and then they left, and I was not allowed to go do them on a competing radio station. The program has really been down, at least the point I was there. Now, after Paul Hackett left, Pete Carroll came on board, and we know what the history book will write about that.
Right.
But I love the Pac-10. I'd done Arizona State for 7 years, so I knew what the conference was all about, and I love doing Pac-10 football. It's just a fun conference to be around, and what Pete Carroll has been able to do at SC is spectacular.
And speaking of USC, they're everybody's preseason #1 in college football this year in 2007. UCLA also ranked in the top 20 in the preseason publications. What about these teams?
Well, SC doesn't recruit. They just choose. I mean, it is absolutely amazing that Pete Carroll can knock on any door in any part of the country and get the #1 player out of Florida, the #1 player out of Michigan. You name it, he's got the opportunity to get him. I think the other thing that's really interesting to me is he's been able to keep all these players happy.
Yeah.
He's got a zillion running backs, and everybody stays, and everybody does somewhere down the road get the chance to play. And he's got all these quarterbacks there, too. So it's kind of unique how he's been able to do it. UCLA is a very different deal because the academic standards at Westwood are very different. It's a really special place. I think it's a great, great campus. But the program it's hard to compete against what USC has been across town because the dynamics of Southern Cal are very different than UCLA. But like the program, Carl Durrell has won some big games. They've also, been up and down, up and down. It's just a little bit different culture at UCLA. Not to say it's bad, but, conversely, UCLA basketball is spectacular.
You bet it is.
What that man has done is just what Ben Howland has accomplished in the shadow of John Wooden is just utterly phenomenal.
Yeah, it's amazing. UCLA has made it to the Final Four in basketball 2 years in a row, and of course USC always the big football power. Now, aside from USC, on a national scale here, talking college football, LSU, Texas, West Virginia, Michigan, and Florida are also contenders for the national title. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a little bit early in the process. We'll just have to see who gets through camp in August till we get to the first weekend of September healthy. Obviously, West Virginia returns the quarterback and returns a great tailback. But, at the end of the day, West Virginia historically has never been able to play great defense. In terms of the Big 12, there's lots of transition, a lot of changes going on there. Oklahoma loses all of its offense, so I don't know that the Sooners are the same. Florida has to change quarterbacks, although the kid that's going to play quarterback, Tim Tebow, has played a lot of football for them as a true freshman. So, he's got that leg up. He'll be a little bit ahead of the curve. But SC is SC is SC.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And just a spectacular spectacular program. And Michigan, they do return some quality people there, although there's a big difference between SC's team speed, teams in the Southeastern Conference team speed, and the team speed that the Big Ten doesn't have.
Exactly. And one thing about some of these other schools around the Midwest, the Notre Dames, the Nebraskas, the Michigans, the Ohio States, for them to be able to keep up with the Florida schools and the USCs and the Texases of the world, where all the top recruits seem to be coming from, Florida, Texas, California, they had to go to those states, recruit, plug them in, and build that way. And that's how so many of those teams, the Notre Dames, the Nebraskas, were able to win national titles in the 90s and 80s, et cetera. What's your take on the BCS, Lee? It's never been good to the Pac-10, has it?
Well, I understand the concept that people want to see a true national champion, but the thing that kind of throws a monkey wrench into this is the history and legacy of the bowls. And people say, oh, well, you ought to convert all these bowls and use them as a playoff stepping stone to a championship game. But the problem is if you do that, then it makes the second-tier and third-tier bowls appear meaningless, and it damages their relationships in their community. You never want to do that. I'll guarantee you, Memphis State hadn't been to a bowl game in 28 years. When their kids got a chance a year ago to go to a bowl game, Bob, for the first time, that is a memory for a lifetime.
You bet it is.
Whether they were 7-5 or 6-6, they get the ring, they get the gear. Those kids will never, ever forget that. And I don't think you ever want to destroy the uniqueness of the bowls. And there's a specialness to the Rose Bowl, Big Ten, Pac-10. The Holiday Bowl in San Diego is known for its shootouts. You don't want to ever do anything to mess that up. If those bowls had not been in place, if we didn't have a history and legacy that goes back to 1938, with some of these Bulls. I could understand coming up with a true playoff, but I don't want to see them wreck the mystique of the Bulls and what it means to each of those individual communities.
Lee, I'd like to go down the line here and talk to you about some top moments in each of these team sports in your lifetime that you can recall, get your opinion. I'm going to start with Major League Baseball. What's your greatest Major League Baseball memory?
Well, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in the era of Yankee baseball, and we know how dominant that was. I grew up and had the chance as a young kid to go to Yankee Stadium and see Mickey Mantle.
You bet.
And I also grew up in that era when the Yankees hated the Giants, who hated the Dodgers, and it was a bad triangle, and they all played together in the boroughs. So I recalled that. It was one of my first memories of going to Old Ebbets Field, going to Old Yankee Stadium, going to the Polo Grounds before those teams ever vacated. So just my personal attachment to baseball is what I remember the most.
In New York in the 1950s and how great it was. All of them won championships, but somehow it just seemed that the Giants and Dodgers got together one day and said, hey, look, the Yankees own this town. Let's go somewhere where we can be kings. Let's go to San Francisco and Los Angeles, and we'll be king there and not have to worry about the Yankees anymore.
Well, the funny thing is, though, you're talking about 1957. What are we talking about? Stadiums. Couldn't build stadiums. Couldn't find a place to replace Ebbets Field, find something to replace the Polo Grounds. What are we talking about in 2007 in some of our franchises? Stadiums.
Oh.
So the business has not really changed, even though the decades have indeed changed. But
how about your greatest NFL moment?
Well, obviously, broadcasting NFL football has been the elite part of my career, and I'll forever love it and never ever forget it, and do miss it. As a kid, I grew up, and you have to understand that I didn't like the Yankees. So, I mean, I was an Indians and a Red Sox fan. I just could not stand the Yankees. Well, as a kid, I also grew up loving the Cleveland Browns and Jim Brown. Sure. And I did not like the New York Football Giants. So
okay.
I was in a minority because I lived on eastern Long Island, and I was the only one that I knew that disliked the New York teams. So as a kid growing up in that era, yeah, and in terms of my professional broadcast career, obviously getting a chance to broadcast a Super Bowl with the Chargers versus the 49ers.
Sure.
The first Rose Bowl game I ever did, I did Arizona State versus Michigan when the Sun Devils got there for the first time ever.
86 season?
Yeah, I'll never ever forget that. So I've been able to do some spectacular big events in sports.
How about college football? What's one of your great college football memories?
Well, I'd say the Sun Devils. We used to play on Saturday night at Arizona State, and they drew 72,000 fans.
Sure.
I mean, it was a religion, Bob.
Frank Cush era, huh?
Well, it was after the Cush era, coming off probation. It was a Darryl Rogers era.
Okay.
Washington came in with Don James. They were ranked, I think, third in the country, and they had an unbelievable football team, and they had been the Rose Bowl representative for years upon years. And I remember it was a night in October, and they came in number 2 or number 3 in the country with this phenomenal offense and this unbelievable defense, and the Sun Devils pushed them up and down the field in Tempe like they were in a shopping cart.
How about that?
Couldn't believe it. Just killed them. And that was one of the highlights because at that point, if the Sun Devils had beaten the Huskies that night, they would have been in the driver's seat, and they killed them, and it eventually went on and won the entire conference race. So that was one of my great college football memories. I also broadcast the most unique, explosive game, I think, in modern-day history. I did San Diego State football on Extra Sports, and that was the Marshall Faulk era.
Sure.
And we had the 51-51 shootout tie with Brigham Young.
Oh, wow.
That was electric. I mean, that was, I've never, ever experienced anything like that, and that put that in my memory bank, too.
Oh, yeah. How about the NBA?
Well, I've never done NBA basketball, but I was in Cleveland the first time the Cavaliers got good. I was working in Cleveland, got the chance to sit there courtside and, quote, see the miracle of Richfield when the Cavaliers came from an utter disgrace as an expansion team to get to the NBA Eastern Finals against, I think it was Elvin Hayes. In the
75-76 season.
Yeah, Washington Wizards.
Yeah, Fitch was the he was the coach. Jim Jones, Jimmy Brewer, Dick Snyder, I think was his name.
Yeah, Jimmy Clemens. I mean, it was a really good
mid-70s.
So I kind of cut my teeth on the NBA there because as a kid, I remember seeing Willis Reed and Dave DeBusschere. I remember seeing Wilt Chamberlain at what was the old Madison Square Garden. So I had a chance to really experience some big-time basketball.
How about the NHL?
Well, I did hockey for 8 years. Loved hockey. Grew up in a hockey background. I had the chance to be in the World Hockey Association for 4 years till it merged with the NHL. So I broadcast a lot of games across Canada, broadcast an all-star game. So that was kind of a really neat treat. I did minor league hockey for 4 years, and if you recall the movie Slapshot, that was filmed in my league. Wow. That was the last year I was in the minor leagues. I think it was 1974, and virtually every angle to that story, Slapshot, is true. And a lot of the hockey players that I was with and rode buses with and drank beer with were all part of that movie because we all played in the league. And kind of a sidebar to that story, we were all 24-year-old guys broadcasting, and it was the Eastern Hockey League. Well, get this. I was in Mohawk Valley in upstate New York. I went on to have a really nice career as a voice of the Chargers in the NFL. The guy that was broadcasting down on Long Island is a kid by the name of Eli Gold. He's the voice of NASCAR and the voice of Alabama football.
How about that?
Third guy, broadcast out of Binghamton, his name was Andy McWilliams, became the TV voice of the Cincinnati Reds.
Ooh.
Another guy who's in Erie, Pennsylvania, John Paul Della Camera. He's the voice of World Cup soccer right now on ESPN. And the other one, Bob Costas.
There you go.
He was in Syracuse. My age, he was broadcasting Syracuse Blazer
Went
hockey.
to KMOX in St. Louis.
And look where he is now up on NBC TV.
Right.
So we had 5 guys, all about the same age, drinking beer, riding buses, and look where our careers took us.
That's fabulous.
It's kind of a novel story.
That's fabulous, Lee. That's certainly a great story. One thing, talking about hockey, it certainly was great to see the Stanley Cup title won in Southern California as the Ducks won here recently. It had to be a great thrill. All right, jumping on here to baseball again, how do you view the Dodgers for this 07 season? How far can they go?
Well, they're a very good team. A great farm system that Ned Colletti inherited. I think they can go deep. How deep, who knows? I think the whole season's going to turn on who does what July 31st at the trading deadline. Do the Dodgers make a deal to get a big power bat? San Diego's already made one deal to get the hitting catcher, Michael Barrett. Mm-hmm. I think whoever executes a deal at the deadline, the thing is that the Dodgers really believe in their kids in the farm system, and they firmly believe that kid, Matt Kemp's, going to be a 30-home run hitter, and they like Ethier. So they're not that quick to pull the trigger to get rid of some of these kids. I think the long-range program of the Dodgers is excellent just because they invest, they draft well, they scout very well. San Diego has not done a good job in the draft, not done a good job in the Caribbean, so they're still running uphill trying to catch them.
I was going to ask about those Padres. Pretty good pitching. Do they have enough to maybe advance to the playoffs, get to the World Series?
See me midnight, July 31st. We'll see who does the deal, and I can give you a much better feel. All these teams out here are kind of identical. They all got really good pitching. They're all a little bit short in the power department.
How about Angels?
Tremendous franchise. Owner writes a check. Owner very committed. Artie Moreno's just a marvelous marketing guy. They've done a great job. You know, the Angels always viewed themselves under the Disney regime and prior to that under Autry as being small market America. Well, they are a big-time player now. They draw from not only Orange County, but they're drawn from Los Angeles. They draw big numbers of fans come down. I guess it's the 91 out of Riverside County. Mm-hmm. So they've done a really, really nice job. And their farm system has developed some pretty good players, too.
Win a world championship, and guess what? The fans are going to come, and everybody's going to like you, and that's what it takes. They finally got that first title, the Angels did, back in 2002. Then on the other side of the coin here, switching back to pro basketball, we've got the Lakers. How do you look at them for the 07-08 season? What's going to happen to Kobe?
Who knows? We got to see what November 1st looks like and who's on the roster and who's not on the roster. You know, they're a byproduct of what I think has been bad leadership. They have made a lot of mistakes on player personnel. In the NBA, it's all about player personnel. With the salary cap, it's hard now. You can't build now what you used to be able to build. There's no way to get, quote, Shaquille O'Neal in the front door. That was all done before the salary cap was kicked into place. You know, there are no Jabbar trades coming. It's just hard. But the thing is, you can't miss on players, and they've missed on a ton of players over the last 6 or 7 years. The Kobe Bryant situation, totally disagree with how he's handled it. Would not trade him. Don't give up on him, but try to be proactive to get more players around him.
Absolutely, and I know that some of the Laker fans are screaming, trade him. Some are saying, keep him. We'll just have to see what happens. Lee, I'd like to get your thoughts here. Quick synopsis on the following national and Southern California sportscasters. Always wanted to hear your opinion on some of your fellow people that you've worked with, etc. Got a bunch here for you to evaluate. I'm going to start with longtime Padre announcer Jerry Coleman. Your evaluation of him.
War hero, nice gentleman, like him, kind of broadcaster emeritus. Obviously doesn't have the fastball that he had before, but I still enjoy it. I accept whatever his strengths and weaknesses are, and I've always liked him. And again, I grew up when he was a player. One of my biggest thrills is I got the chance to do a couple of Padre exhibition games when the games were on one of our Clear Channel stations in San Diego. And I walked in there and sat there during spring training, and he looked at me, and I opened an envelope, and I put right in front of him a baseball card from 1955, an old Yankee baseball card. And I said, autograph this for me. So he's kind of one of my quiet heroes.
How about Ted Leitner?
He's okay what he does. He built a nice following as a TV anchor. I built a phenomenal following as a radio sports talk show host. I think we're both good at what we do.
Good. Next guy, of course, it's Dodger Stadium, Vin Scully.
What a gentleman. You know what he is? He's an artist. He is an artist.
Plain and simple.
I've interviewed him multiple times. Very special person, tremendous values, pseudo-intellectual. Just beyond belief how well read he is and how great. I think he's the greatest of all time. Best speech I've ever heard, Baseball Hall of Fame, and this goes back probably to the 1980s when he was inducted. He made the comment, we always ask, why me? Why me when things go wrong? Why me? He stood on the steps of the Cooperstown Hall of Fame, and he said, why me? Why am I here?
Exactly.
History will write the greatest of all time. Like I say, he's an artist.
Larry Stewart, the longtime Los Angeles Times media writer who I had on my show recently, said that he thought Vin Scully was the best sportscaster in the history of the United States. He may be right. How about Chick Hearn?
I didn't hear Chick when he was at the peak of his career. Everybody has told me he was spectacular. I only got to hear Chick towards the tail end of his career. He was an icon, and obviously he was so very popular because he was the voice of the Lakers, and the Lakers have been one of the greatest franchises of all time. If he were the voice of the Philadelphia Athletics, I don't know the guy be viewed in the same light, but
right.
What a tremendously special person. I always liked him. He was always accessible to me, always talked, always very opinionated, and, he had an unbelievable run.
How about Bob Miller?
Neat guy. Kind of lost in the shuffle. He's kind of on the side streets.
Hockey in Los Angeles.
Well, hockey in Los Angeles. He's very good, very nice gentleman. We'll never forget his calls when Gretzky was driving the Kings to the NHL Stanley Cup Finals. Doesn't get as much coast-to-coast notoriety as he should. He's in Los Angeles, #2 market in the country. He should be held in the same light as Chick and Vinny, but I don't think he has. But the guy's in the Hockey Hall of Fame that's for forever.
Yeah, exactly. He's a tremendous. How about current USC football announcer Pete Arbogast?
Nice guy. I've known him a long time. I think he does a real solid play-by-play job. Great pipes. Can I rent those voices? But nice gentleman. I've always gotten along with him. And, of course, I broke in his sidekick, Paul McDonald, when I was doing USC football. Paul and I are good friends.
Sure. How about Dan Rowe and Hank Bauer?
Well, Dan Rowan was here for a short time.
Did the Chargers with Hank Bauer, right?
Yeah, for a couple of years.
Okay.
He retired now, lives in Minnesota. He did the Vikings for a long time.
Okay.
He kind of got caught in the same deal that I did, changing rights fees. Suddenly you're on the street corner without a job. Hank's a fun guy and obviously knows a lot of football and is popular in his own right in San Diego.
How about Josh Lewin?
Nice guy. Does Texas Ranger baseball, does some stuff for Fox, does Charger football on one of our FM stations. I really like him. Kind of lost in the shuffle because he doesn't live in San Diego, so I don't think anybody really knows who he is.
How about former Charger and USC announcer Tom Kelly?
Well, when I think of USC football, I think of him.
Right, going back to the 60s and 70s.
I'm not sure why he's not doing the games. It was odd back in the day when we had the Trojans for 3 years in the late 90s, and they came to me and said, who would you recommend to do the games? We're going to pick up the rights. And at the point, I was doing the Chargers. And I said, how about Tom Kelly? Why not?
Yeah.
Because he is history. He is SC, but it didn't work. And oddly enough, I wound up doing the games for that 3-year span. But he is Mr. Trojan.
Some talk show hosts here. Jim Rome.
Great job. Has carved out his own little niche. He's got a different angle and a different approach, just like I have a different angle, different approach. I think he's carved for himself a tremendous career. Feel bad when he left here. He stepped on some people, and I don't think that's fair. I don't think you ever forget your roots and people who helped you.
Absolutely.
And he's gone on to be a real star, and he's done very well in his own right, and he's kind of grown out of some of the punkish stuff that he did. And
right.
He's done really, really well.
How about Dan Patrick?
He's a TV guy who used his TV stardom to springboard into radio and does a really nice job on ESPN. It's a very different show. We all have different tastes. His is long-form interview. It doesn't carry as much clout in terms of, quote, information, but, he's a marquee guy working for that network.
Some national play-by-play announcers here and commentators, a few here. Joe Buck.
Really gifted. Obviously, he's got his father's abilities.
Sure.
Like him. Very easy to listen to. Again, TV play-by-play and packaging's a little bit different than this. They're doing play-by-play on radio, but very good at what he does.
Al Michaels.
As complete a broadcaster as there is. I've known him since he was in Hawaii back in the 1970s doing the Hawaii Islanders and the old Pacific Coast League. And gentlemen, I've always gotten along very, very well with him.
How about Jim Nance?
I don't know him very well. I like him. Very good at what he does, and especially on golf. I think very, very special guy. I've only interviewed him maybe one time, but again, he's based out of New York. New York doesn't necessarily pay attention to what L.A. is doing, but easy listen.
Here's another guy I know Dick Enberg.
Tremendous guy. A little bit throwback. Did not have the chance to hear him when he was the voice of the Angels, but everybody told me that he was just a spectacular broadcaster, and I think a very good gentleman, too.
My first summer out here, which was 1985, when I moved out here from the Midwest, I could tune to the Dodgers and hear Vin Scully, and I could tune to the Angel game and hear Dick Enberg. It was quite a thrill to hear both of them the same night, just flip from one channel to the other, and there they both are. John Madden, the greatest commentator in NFL history?
It's a different act. I like him, but it's gotten a little bit old. A lot of people tell me he's not a real easy guy to be around, which is unfortunate. It's okay. I'm not going to say stale. I don't know if that's a fair critique or analysis, but it is what it is, and it's rather simplistic, and it kind of deals to the lowest common denominator. Now, I wanted to interject here. You were talking about play-by-play guys. When I was a kid growing up, I was hooked on baseball on radio. So
Sure.
late at night, when the sun goes down on the East Coast, I could pick up everything.
Oh.
I could pick up Chicago, I could pick up KMOX in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
I could pick up Cincinnati and Boston and wherever the games were being played. So I was kind of spoiled by listening to all that stuff.
You sound like me. When I was growing up in Omaha, I'd have my little radio there, and I'd hear Chicago, Minnesota, Kansas City. Could not pick up St. Louis because there was a station in Omaha that blocked out KMOX that was right at the same frequency pretty much. And I'd listen to all those guys, too, in the Midwest. I know how that is. One last guy, before I get to a couple more subjects. I know you're pressed for time. Pat Summerall.
Special guy, really good. Ex-football player, didn't know broadcasting, became a really good broadcaster. Have interviewed him a bunch of times, has gone through some real personal trauma with alcoholism and has kind of come back out the other side and is a much better person for it, but liked his work. That was back before ESPN and everybody's screaming and yelling. He and Tom Brookshire were one of the first, quote, successful NFL broadcast teams.
Talking here with the great sports talk show host, the best local sports talk show host in America, in my opinion, Lee Hacksaw Hamilton. Lee, a couple more items here. First off, what in your mind makes a good sports talk show host?
Well, the industry's changed. We got guy talk, we got yell and scream talk, we got sledgehammer sports talk. It just depends what direction your station wants to take it. I think knowledge and information, and obviously a little personality. I don't know if ego has to overwhelm the show. I have a very different approach to it than a lot of other people. My whole theory is I want you to take an emotional attachment to my show because your phone call counts. So I try to treat most of the callers with a fair degree of respect and answer their questions and give my opinions and get their opinions at the same time. But again, all stations are doing it a lot of different ways now, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, and some of it's shtick, and some of it's substance.
What makes a good play-by-play man?
Be able to paint a picture.
There you
Plain
go.
and simple.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate. We did 3 in the booth with the Chargers, and our legacy here was the best Charger play-by-play team they've ever had. It was coupled with obviously a Super Bowl run, but there's a lot of 4-12 football there at the same time. But I think the ability to let everybody have their say. To me, the most important thing is the game, not the guys broadcasting the game, and that was my philosophy in doing Charger football and Seahawk football.
I used to listen to you, and you and I believe Bill Werndell, and then there was can't remember the other gentleman.
I had Chet Forty and Jim Laslovic and
There
Pat
you go.
Kerr, and we had a really special group of guys that cared about the quality of the broadcast.
Compare radio, Lee, today as opposed to 20 years ago,
Oh, that's a good question.
2007 to 1987.
Well, there's a lot more radio stations now that are available doing a lot more different things. Talk radio saved the AM band, and I think that's really kind of an interesting thing as to how that side of the industry has just changed drastically. But there's a lot more formats. Everything right now is geared towards a specific piece of the pie. I would have never thought, Bob, if you had come to me in 1987 and said people be doing sports talk radio 24 hours a day, I didn't think I'd be enough interest. You know what? Doggone 1,300 sports talk stations around America. Some doing it well, some not doing it well.
Yeah.
But the one thing is people are just addicted to sports and they want to talk
Right.
about their favorite teams. When I've done some fill-in work for Fox Sports Radio Network, and I am amazed at 3 o'clock in the morning, people are calling me from West Virginia wanting to talk about the Mountaineers and the Steelers. So,
There you go.
people just have this huge emotional attachment.
That is Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, who I consider the best local sports talk show host in America, also has done play-by-play, and I want to thank you very much for listening. Any comments or suggestions on the presentation you just heard, please call 818-780-2270, 818-780-2270, or you could email
jalindstrom25 @gmail.com. Thank you.